Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks for the introduction. Those are long introductions, eh?
So sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay, I got this. I'm getting lots of practice.
and John, when you say you live near Vancouver, is it Abbotsford?
It's Abbotsford, yes.
All right.
I always say near Vancouver because I'm online all over the place, and I don't want people to know exactly where I live. But yes.
Nice.
I've
prepared some screen, some slide, and I will share it with everyone here. So yeah, thank you, Tiffany, for this wonderful introduction. And as it was mentioned, I come from the world of ethics. And before launching my consulting firm, I was working in academia. I've done a PhD in bioethics. I was also working in medical humanities, and ethics was the center of my concern. And from the world of ethics, of reflecting on the subject, I'm trying now to do business, to move from theoretical to applied ethics. And what I'd like to do is I think that John and Shawn have a different journey. They started in the world of business and are thinking about ethics now. So I'd like to know a little bit more about John and Shawn, like how has ethics been part of your journey, both professionally and personally, because I think both are cannot be separated. And here we'll give a definition of ethics, like a broad definition, as something that is good for individual and society. We don't need to dive into a specific definition, but have a broad working definition. So maybe we'll start with Shawn here.
Yeah, great, and thanks for having me. Sorry, I had to put on my do not disturb here. My phone's ringing as we're getting started. Yeah, I think it's great to sort of reflect on that. I wear two hats. First West was sort of described in the bio, which is a board hat, which is maybe about 20% of my time. Most of my time is with Domain 7, being sort of digital transformation product platform group. And so as I think about starting it out, I think about the early days when I started Domain 7, which would have been in the late 90s, so 97 era, and 97, 98. And in those days, dating myself a bit there, but we all wore pretty rose-colored glasses, and the technology itself, and I don't know for others that reflect back then, the technology itself was seen, really as a socially beneficial tool by its very nature. Like it itself was going to yield democracy. It was going to sort of tear down sort of walls of division between people. It was going to equal the playing field from the large players to the small. It was going to allow the small content producers to compete with the large, and many of those things are true. But I think we were perhaps pretty naive at that time about the nature of how it would unfold, how it would impact us as societies and individuals and organizations. But from those early days, starting the work that we did, it was driven by some of those rose-colored pictures of what the future would be. That was why I was involved. It's why it was meaningful and interesting. It was a possibility to be engaged in something that could really have that amazing impact down the road. And then just on sort of the credit union side, not that I'm going to spend much time talking about that today, but one of the interesting things that drew me to being involved in organizations that are owned by their members is part of what I think is a challenge today is a question of how fundamentally are our organizations motivated, and what does that create in terms of choices that they make, and how organizations sort of coalesce around motivations based on the structure of how they're set up and how they work. And so that has been an interesting part of my exploration and journey in that space as well. So those are maybe two things to highlight to kick it off.
Thanks, Shawn. And how about you, John? How's ethics been part of your journey?
I love what Shawn said. We entered tech. We love tech. Some of us, maybe not all of us, but we loved it and we enjoyed it. And we thought, hey, it was a wonderful thing. It was a good thing. And I still have that to some degree. But, as we've learned, as we've seen with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, as we've seen with The Social Dilemma, if you've watched that on Netflix, there are some major downsides. So that's a similar journey that I've found, and what is maybe unique to me and others like me is that I write at Forbes about 25, 30 times a month. In a given month, I'll probably do 15 to 20 different video podcasts, and in all of those, there's many people calling, there's many people emailing and saying, hey, you should cover this. Hey, you should talk to this. Hey, you need to talk to that person. And obviously I'm drawn to stories that are interesting to me because I write about and I cover stuff that I care about, that I'm interested in. And that can have some downsides. That can have some unintended consequences because what I cover is a political act as much as how I cover it. And so what I think we've learned increasingly over the past decade, and maybe at an accelerated pace in the last year alone, is to be intentional about the things that we do, to be intentional about who we talk to, who we feature, who we ask, those sorts of things, and to try to do a better job in that. So that's one of the things that I'd mention. This is a never-ending journey. Ethics in general, as well as ethics around technology, as well as ethics of inclusion. But ethics in general is a never-ending journey. And all I can say is hopefully most of us are getting better as well as wiser as we're getting older.
Thanks for this answer. And you mentioned the Social Dilemma here and Cambridge Analytica, and I think a lot of us have seen probably the latest Netflix show on this topic. And I think here where we can move the conversation is that design is not neutral. I think we probably could all agree on this, that design is not neutral. We want, some of us maybe want to make us believe that design can be neutral. Like, for instance, we use a knife in the morning. We can use this knife to cut our bread, or we can use this knife to hurt someone. But
did we lose you,
Johann?
We may have lost Johann here, Shawn. I hope you have 45 minutes of content.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So while we're waiting to come back, I think I got the gist of sort of the layup on the question there, and hopefully he rejoins us here in a minute. I'm assuming you and I are still live.
We are still live, yes, and
okay.
Maybe Johann will.
Okay.
Johann is working on it.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll just talk from my experience about the idea of sort of the way tools, or in my case, services and products, for that matter, but services play a role in sort of our sort of the ethics of our work. I think again, thinking back, one of those things that initially would have been to see a lot of the services around optimizing and improving online experiences as being just generally good. Like we these are things that are helpful. They, if you're improving a purchase flow process or a checkout experience or something like that, it just seems benign and helpful, and something that just generally would be categorized as good, normal work. And yet there becomes a very sort of a tipping point, and who knows where it is, or I think that's where ethics comes in, where something goes from being sort of optimized around a purchase flow to manipulating a user in ways that is outside of what they intended or what they thought the process was. Somehow they haven't been involved or aren't privy to what the actual outcomes or desire of the system is. So I think that is very true from a services perspective, that we can be naive about design of our product, services, and experience it, and think that that is a good service or a good tool or process. But at the end of the day, there's a thoughtfulness and probably some thinking that needs to go on beneath that can sort of frame, when does it become something that's abusive, or where we would say sort of an ethics question is at play. People are being done a disservice or undermined in a certain fashion, and it can be very contextualized from a person-to-person basis too. So someone can walk away from an agency and say, "I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm totally manipulating and undermining people." And the person sitting at the desk next to them will be like, "What are you talking about? Like, we're just optimizing purchase flow, and I've got no issue with it." So it's a really tricky thing, I think, for us to think about technology and its use from a services perspective or otherwise, and how it itself has consequences that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, design is not neutral. I feel very inferior to you right now. Oh, now I feel good.
There you go.
Just
spotlight
joking.
over to you.
Exactly. It is interesting, right? Because I've done, when I was doing a lot of primary research, which I still do actually, it was focused on MarTech, right? Marketing technology. And there's a bit of ad tech in there as well. Oh, look, now we're equivalent. We're on the same footing, equality. And so I've continued that in some ways. And I do a podcast for a client called Growth Masterminds. I do another one called Retention Masterclass. And you talk about patterns of software, maybe even dark patterns, right? Patterns where the choice that the company wants you to make is easy. The choice that the company doesn't want you to make is hard, right?
Right.
Or things that are playing on our endorphins. So for instance, my son is big into Snapchat. I log in once a year to see my message on my birthday from Snapchat, Team Snapchat, right? But he's big on Snapchat. And guess what? You have a thing in Snapchat called streaks, right?
Yeah.
And you maintain those streaks by sending at least one message to each of your friends or the ones that you have streaks with every day. And so he does his streaks every day, and it's like 5 minutes. It's not a meaningful message. It's like a hi and done, right? And
anyone as a teenager knows there's nothing meaningful going on there.
Exactly. But that's the software giving you something, saying, hey, there's something of value here, this streak that you've accrued value, you've accrued worth in the system of this app, and you need to keep doing that like a robot, meaninglessly, in order to keep having that. There's other things like that as well, right? I mean, you see that in many different apps, including games, right? The little tidbits that you get. It gets hard, and just as it's getting really hard. Oh, hey, here's a power upgrade. You just have to buy that. There's a little power pack you could buy or something, right? So there are those patterns in a lot of different pieces of software.
What I would say, and I think Johann was getting to this, is the question of, so what are design ethics, and how do they come into play if design isn't neutral? Like, what do we, how do we explore that? And not that I have a ton to add on that, but I do think, just to the examples you just described, John, the question of exposing the hidden decisions that might be happening that we're unaware of. I think, to me, like even just watching something like The Social Dilemma, maybe it just makes people callous to some of these things, but on one level it also exposes them to some of the hidden decisions that are happening behind the scenes, and gives them the agency to make choices based on those. And I think so often in our design ethics, in my mind, would be for us saying, this isn't a neutral tool. How do we expose people to what's actually going on in these choices, and let them make informed choices about them? I think it ties into maybe some of those things you were describing.
That's a really, really good point that you make about why am I seeing this? Why is this ad being shown to me? Why am I having this, default experience?
Mhm.
And it's funny you mentioned algorithms because I'm working on a book of future news. So it's a futuristic book, insights from the future. And one of the things it's little news snippets.
Does it have stock prices
5
in the
years.
future as well for us?
What's that?
Does it have stock prices in the future that we can just use as well?
Those I keep to myself.
Okay.
But we can talk afterwards.
Mhm.
But one of the things I put in there is algorithmic freedom day, as like we should know why Facebook is showing me that friend's updates versus another friend. So if there's something that you're seeing in Twitter, why am I seeing this tweet, not that tweet? Why is this ad being shown to me, right? Is it because I visited that website the other day and so you're showing me an ad for this? But we should know that so that we can decode what the machines are doing, and then we can demystify that stuff and not have crazy conspiracy theories like Facebook is listening to me right now. And now I'm going to get sold, I don't know, an algorithm improver or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I do have some of the questions here that he was initially thinking of going through, but before we do that, I just want to, I think that it's one thing for us to talk about these sorts of issues, and talk about the Googles and Apples and Facebooks of the world, and that's important because we need to be aware of those. But I think it also is worthwhile talking about them in the micro everyday of local, even small and mid-sized businesses. I think we're not necessarily in tune to the own multitude of choices that are made in sort of small and local businesses around whether that even be digital experiences or technology that they're putting in for services with customers, and how thoughtful that is being sort of implemented relative to these things. And I think it's easy for this to just become a bash on the big guys. Rightfully so. They influence everything about us right now, and we should have scrutiny on them. But I think it's also there's an accountability just to our own. You're involved in tech startups in our own businesses and organizations at whatever scale, asking sort of questions of what, are we creating a knife that can do two things? Are we creating something that that could be used for good, but how else might, what it might be the unintended consequences of this thing I'm working on or building?
That makes a ton of sense. And I mean, even the personal ethics, should I buy this thing via Amazon, get it tomorrow via Prime, or should I go to my local store? Right? One is very easy. The other might be better for my community.
Yeah. And one is a lot easier when you're quarantined, when you're
Exactly. What is quarantine? Are we in quarantine?
Yeah. No, that's great. Johann had some questions around
ethics washing.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. So I don't know how familiar people are with it. I don't know what definition you use for it. Oh, he's back.
So
Johann.
as I was saying, design is not neutral. I don't know what happened. Sorry, guys.
Well, you were talking about knives. We were worried about you. Who knows?
I think I didn't think ethics was this dangerous to talk about ethics and then some sort of censorship.
Moving on to talk a little bit about ethics washing as a paradigm.
All right. Yeah. So that's perfect. So carry on.
Yeah. I mean, you can set up any elements. I think definition-wise might even good place to start there. We might all have different ways we talk about it, but I don't know how you want to frame it.
Did you just start it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, the question because we talked, I assume the first part, like our personal journey of ethics, and then it was impossible now to avoid talking about ethics, and the danger is to just move towards ethics washing. We know we had greenwashing, and now we have ethics washing. And my question was for both of you, like, how do we avoid this? How can we move past this and make sure that it's just not a veneer, but that people are actually sincere in what they're doing, and even in the business they're doing?
I think that's a very, very difficult thing, honestly, because we don't always know people's motivations or companies' motivations. Sometimes it's suspect, something becomes a big deal. Black Lives Matter bursts on the scene as several Black individuals are killed in police action, right? And does that all of a sudden become the big thing that a brand uses? And is that a good thing because they're responding to what's happening in the culture, or is that they're just ethics washing and piggybacking on something? It's hard to see. I guess the challenging thing is, does it go more than skin deep? Is it more than a marketing slogan? Is it more than a campaign? That's the question. How do you know that? Perhaps it's if a company puts some money behind what they're saying. Perhaps it's if they do something and they act on something rather than just feature it in their advertising.
Yeah, I think I would just echo what you're saying, John. Like this, it's really tricky to, I think it's just perhaps there's a natural outcome that's just happening here around what we're seeing as ethics washing, in the sense of people touting an ethical perspective or capability of an organization, and yet hiding behind that some sub-ethical behavior, and sort of using one to counterbalance the other. I think the first comment I would make is I don't know how much of that would actually be intentional. I do wonder, just at the scale and size of a lot of organizations that we would scrutinize like this, like left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, or confusion around how we apply. We've got a principle or a guideline here. How do we apply it? And different perspectives on that yielding different decisions. I think it becomes really challenging in that. And I think there are good things that can be done. Outside parties with things like BCorp and that, I think we can talk about that a little bit more, but can help to some extent. But I think I often wonder if we're having the conversation too late at times. Like it's just what the organization outputs at the end of a long process of journey of producing something, and then is that output ethical or not? And if that's the only test, and we're not looking at how the organization is structured or run, or how people are making decisions within it, I think we can't just go to that last moment and say, is the output ethical, and hope that we can we can assume that will always be consistent, if we're not actually asking ourselves about the whole stack of experiences leading up to that point, and how they're all aligned and sort of connected to sort of the output of an organization.
And to jump on this, I think maybe even before all of this, is as you want to enter into the world of business. And I mentioned earlier that I came first to ethics into business, and it's difficult sometimes to think like even like selling something, marketing something, because you feel you there's an element sometimes even of manipulation, and how do you navigate this? And another example, maybe I'd like to bounce some ideas with you two. It's if we take this idea of, okay, we're gonna create some a better way to travel, and we're gonna create better cars, ethical cars. We're gonna create electric cars. But on the other hand, maybe the future is actually to reduce cars altogether. So how do you even navigate those things? Maybe John have some ideas here.
What's the answer, John? How do we navigate
this is a tough one. Okay, I'll just solve it for you in 2 seconds. And,
that's perfect.
Here's the interesting thing that I've thought many times over these past 8 or 9 months of global craziness that we call COVID and shutdown and lockdown and quarantine, is that we have an opportunity to rethink the global economy here. Of course, humanity's passed up many opportunities in the past and is likely to pass up this one as well. But what's really obvious, and what's been really obvious as we've gone through this quarantine business, is that the amount that we produce as a society in terms of food and goods and everything else is far in advance of what we actually need. And yet we've maintained this sort of work cycle and habit and ethic that everybody, and it really is, pretty much every adult these days, should have a full-time job and be working 40, 50, 60 hours a week or something like that. And the reality is that is based on a consumer ideology that, I need this to be happy, I need that to be happy, I need many other things to be happy, and I've got to work super hard competitively with many other people to get there. And that's not horrible necessarily, but it does lead to a total disposable economy. And you mentioned, should we even create that car at all, whether it's electric or not? Well, maybe. Do I need 3 cars? Maybe I can have 1 car. Does that work? Those sorts of things. This is an opportunity for us to reconsider how we work, how we live, how we consume, and how we produce. I haven't really heard any politicians or world leaders broach that kind of conversation, though. Do we all need to be working as much as we need to be working? Or could we do it a different way? Could we set up our economy and our society in a different way? Those are very challenging things to do. And most people that try and do them violently and poorly and result in a lot of suffering and chaos. I wholeheartedly grant that. But we have to look forward and see, look, robotics and automation is increasing everywhere. Increasingly, the economy is digital and value is digital, not physical. These things are coming, and we are entering a phase where there's going to be significant job loss due to those factors. How are we going to set up our society such that either all the people who are currently working, driving stuff around, driving people around, making physical things that will soon be automated, the manufacturer will be soon automated, they'll have jobs in the digital economy, or that we can set up our economy and our society such that let's bring on more automation. Let's not be scared of the robots. Let's make sure everybody gets taken care of in the process. This is an opportunity to show that that is at least possible. And I don't know if we can grab that and operate on that.
But yeah, to continue on this and to jump back to what Shawn said in his introduction, that he entered the tech industry when it was very exciting and thinking like it's going to solve a lot of problem. And for me, entering the tech industry later, I'm like, well, it seems that it failed to actually deliver. We've outsourced a lot of our work to machines. We have automation. But yet we work even more. Like if I gain time now, even let's think just with emails. With emails, we can gain an incredible amount of time because we don't need to like send letters or phone. But the time we've gained, we've just filled it with more work. We didn't fill it with anything that is different than work. So you mentioned, John, that no world leaders have approached this type of conversation, but I think there is some conversation about universal income or basic income, and I'd like to take a moment to think about this, if that is something that we'll have to consider more and more as we move more and more towards a digital economy, and how are we gonna do this? If we can outsource even more now to computers or machines or whatever. So maybe Shawn can. Oh, sorry. Maybe Shawn can jump on this.
Sure, I'll give a few thoughts, and then John would love to hear what you've got on it. Yeah, I certainly think that there's an inevitability to the trajectories that we're seeing. And John, you're outlining them. Like, what does it look like if we're making these choices around the jobs and the people, impact on people in our markets, so I think the challenge that we have, not to get into a political discussion here, is that we don't do discussions like this really well. It's not only that people aren't having the discussion, it's just, or maybe I'm just the only one that hasn't seen good discussions. Maybe you guys see them everywhere on Facebook, but we don't do discussions like this very well. Either you're for totally free, unbridled individual commercialism, or you're for Marxist totalitarianism, and those are your two options. So, what are you going to choose? And that's not helpful. What we actually need to do, I think, to your point, Johann, is these are nuanced, complicated questions. They're ones that actually work themselves out in our local communities as well. We in Abbotsford, we have a challenge with homelessness. We have issues of job dislocation that are going to hit our communities here, that will affect people in our schools and our communities. So I do think it's us finding ways to have better dialogue are going to be critical. It's not like can we, it's like we must, because there is an inevitability to, I think, the shift in jobs, and I'm not sure what that means in terms of how we are able to do that. But so things like universal basic income, I think are worth considering, but I think we are going to have to find ways to depoliticize those conversations and not have them be trigger words or sort of empty banners signifying which side of the political spectrum you're on, but actual indicators of solutions to real problems that people from any political sort of leaning can engage with and have conversation. And if we're actually going to come at solutions, that'll be helpful.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned polarization, and that's what I feel too. Again, coming from ethics, the notion of profit, even the notion of profit, sometimes people are questioning it, like, and then so you either for profit, not for profit, and so on. But I think as we rethink our business model, and you mentioned BCorp before, so there's some new organization that try to bring business and ethics under the same umbrella. So there's the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There's BCorp. There's the movement of circular economy, regenerative design. So have you guys also thought about those things in your practice or in your organization to implement ethics into your daily businesses?
I just want to ping back on something that Shawn mentioned, and he mentioned the word "must." That we have to look at these things, and I want to underline that in red pen. This is a matter of social survival. This is not a political option or a social option. It's a matter of social survival. If you look at what happened in the U.S. this summer, you had the collision of a variety of factors. One, a pandemic. Two, an upcoming election. Three, inequality and injustice. And you put those together, and there was a powder keg. There was a powder keg of anger, of pushing back, of violence in some cases, in many cases not. But the economic piece is a huge factor here. And you put that together with the political pieces. And if we have a future, and it will happen in Canada to a degree as well, we're a little more insulated because we want to get through things together. That is not necessarily the case for a good chunk of the United States, and they're a big neighbor of ours right next door. If they can't fix that, just imagine what life looks like in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, or something like that, when pretty much anything you want to get manufactured is automated, or it's 3D printed, or whatever the case might be. Pretty much anything that you want to transport, a physical object anywhere, happens via some kind of automated transport. That could be underground, that could be in a tube, that it could be in a lot of different ways, or just a self-driving truck, or whatever the case might be. When you look at the number of jobs that will be impacted by that, and yes, many people will say we'll figure out new things, and we always have in the past. That may be true, but I prefer not to build a strategy on hope. I think that you'll have tens of millions of people permanently, semi-permanently unemployed. Generally young, also old. You've got a boiling pot there, ripe with revolution and lots of disruption in your society. If we can't figure out that piece, I don't see how some societies are going to survive.
And that's a wrap for today. Just joking. I think it's a really challenging point, John, to make. So it comes back to your point, Johann, about like B Corps and that sort of thing. Like, yes, I think it's worthwhile looking at mechanisms like that to change the way our businesses operate. And at the same time, it's not going to be enough. It's that must, underscoring sort of a must. What can we do to accelerate the conversation, make it more effective, so we can actually implement items long before we're at a critical spot? Because when you're in a critical space, it's just like when I'm triggered as an individual. When my amygdala's going, I'm not ready to have a really good conversation. So how
so
can
that
we
was why you sent me that comment on Facebook? Is that
exactly.
that's what's going?
So as a society, how do we engage in this in that effective way? And one of the other challenges I have with BCorp as a not to pick on BCorp, but any of these, is that simply creating a list of sort of check boxes. Are you sort of compliant in these sorts of ways? Do you engage in these sorts of fashions? I think it allows organizations to offload the hard work of discussion, dialogue, and ethics discernment, which I think is actually where all those millions of small decisions are made that lead to unintended consequences down the road. So although they're good, I think they have limited capacity to actually drive different sort of human behavior over time.
Yeah, thanks. And then to keep moving in the direction of the future challenges. So we have people that we think might be put out of work, and that transition period. And then there's also the bigger, more ethical questions, if we didn't have enough challenges raised with all the emerging technologies. And I'm thinking here AI, blockchain, tracking, CRISPR-Cas9, genetic engineering. And there's a lot of ethical questions that come up with this regarding the misuse of data, autonomy, distributive justice. But I think the ultimate question is how do we as humans interact with business, and what does it mean to be human? And then it comes back to a philosophical question. And I did the loop. I started in philosophy. I'm trying to do business, and I ended up again in philosophical questions. So yeah, I'm wondering what you guys think about of this this type of questions. How are we how to navigate again this world of emerging tech? And we talk about the fourth industrial revolution. So what should we do there?
There's huge challenges here, and there's multiple that we need to look at, and privacy is one of them. Obviously, tracking, surveillance is a big one. One of the major challenges, maybe the fundamental challenge, I think, that comes with AI and a lot of the other advances we're seeing, is in around the topic of deepfakes. Deepfakes are getting good enough so that it's getting harder to tell what's true and what's not true. Pair that up with a culture which now has a hard time determining truth in a consensus reality. Pair that up with a culture in which you're in your reality bubble, I'm in my reality bubble, and what makes perfect sense to me as true and verifiable evidence I see with my eyes is the most complete idiocy to you, because you're in a different reality bubble. And we can't even have a conversation civilly, as Shawn was mentioning, because you just seem insane to me, because everything I know, because of all the sources of data and information that I have, tell me that you are a lunatic. Add deepfakes to that. We can't really tell if this is verifiably a true picture of this politician in that scenario, or a true video of that world leader saying that or doing that. And we've got a toxic brew of having a really, really challenging time having conversations, figuring out what's true, and moving forward in a collective consensus manner. A startup that I just talked to out of Europe recently is working on that problem by essentially, they're working on the problem of privacy by deepfaking everybody. So you take a picture of a crowd, perhaps in a demonstration, and they change the faces. So those people have their privacy. They cannot be identified by authorities or something like that. But it's also fake history, and it's deepfaked. And I think finding ways to deal with this technologically, politically, socially is really critical, because if we don't live in the same world, we can't rationally address problems that we need to solve together.
Yeah, and I think to jump on this, there's also then the responsibility of the people that, of course, design those the deep fake and so on. So that raises again questions here. And maybe Shawn, you want to jump on this, like as since you worked a lot in design too. Unless you guys might have already talked about this when I was taken away in the cloud.
I think first of all, John, if you tell us you're actually a deep fake at the end of this, that'll be an amazing reveal. So you'll have fooled me. Just put it that way. I think I just want to go back to the question of what it means to be human. I think one of the things I really appreciate about how the world has gotten smaller is we have become more diverse societies. We have gotten to connect with and hear from and engage with a broader set of people than and thoughts and ways of thinking and engaging than we ever would have previously. And out of that comes an immense creativity and curiosity that I think is really powerful. But it also makes it really challenging. Things that we assumed about the world, or assumed that people assumed about the world, we no longer can in the same way. And add to that the bubbles that John was talking about from a reality perspective. And it makes it really challenging to ask questions which we're uncomfortable asking, like, what is a person for? It's not, I don't know, how would we answer that? What is a person for? It's a really tough question to answer. But it's those sorts of conversations I think that need to happen when we think about technology. So what is it serving? What are we actually assuming about society and about what we're doing? Why is it good? What are we trying to produce? Those sorts of things I actually think would love to see happen much earlier in our society, not when you're like myself, 48 and no longer able to change anything other than grow gray hair. But how do we have these conversations more effectively from like my kids' age through to everyone in their working life, respecting the fact that it's in a very, very diverse context and we can't rely on the same assumptions that we had before. It's hard work. I think it's stuff that would need to happen, but I think it's an interesting part of the question.
So I think this type of question maybe should be raised in like business schools, or when someone wants to start their entrepreneurial journey. And for me here to bring us to the last part of our discussion, I remember taking a business class in my early 20s when I was at university, and the professor mentioned that his assumption was that humans were selfish and rational, and he built his entire economic theory on this. So then I was thinking, well, no wonder that we end up in like places where businesses are just selfish and cold entities that they don't seem to be something that you want to be part of. So then in my studies of ethics, I defended another type of story, another narrative where humans are not just selfish and selfishly motivated or rational, but we're also hardwired to collaborate and to help each other. And I was thinking, so in those two narratives, one is based on selfishness, but the other one on other-centeredness. One calls for co-creation and innovation, and I'm wondering if those two stories, maybe they don't have to be an either or. It seems to me that in business right now, it's a lot about just competition. You need to be the first in the market. You need to dominate everything, take over the world type of thing. But maybe we should talk more about this collaboration story. But we don't have to like erase completely that we are also competitive. Some sort of competition is probably also good and fun to compete. But to put maybe forth this idea of collaboration, and I was wondering as we discuss about building the tech and the digital future of this valley. I'm wondering how we could move forward and give this ethical foundation to it. Any thoughts on this?
I can. It's good questions. I don't know if I have answers to them, but I certainly can talk about it. I'd love to hear John's thoughts on it too. One of the things that jumped out at me with that question, Johann, is the discouraging studies that I've seen where an employee is offered a $5 raise, but if they take the $5 raise, their colleague will get a $10 raise. The other option is for them to take a $2 raise, and their colleague will get no raise. And they'd rather take a smaller raise and have their colleague not get a greater raise, even though it has no impact on them. Like they're actually worse off by penalizing their colleague than they would be otherwise. So just to acknowledge, there are some of these dynamics of human competitiveness. I think you're mentioning that it is maybe part of the way we're sort of we work in community. At the same time, I think we have unnatural structures that reinforce those things all the time in our organizations and businesses, where we incentivize around individual heroics or individual creativity, individual output. We reward people by pay or bonuses, or just position within the organization based on individual activity. Whereas team identity, I think, is the secret power, I think, of a lot of organizations, shifting people from thinking of themselves just as a I win dynamic to a we win dynamic within organizations. And that unlocks both often better results for the individual, but also for the organization when you're identifying with team outcomes rather than just individual. So tying that back, I think, to the question of maybe what could we do, I think on the local scale, might be asking just about how we're structuring our businesses and organizations. What sort of even in our local businesses, what are we rewarding and what are we not rewarding? What are we encouraging in terms of the types of behaviors in our organizations, and what are we actually embodying the types of ethical impacts and outcomes that we want to have in how we're structuring and running our organizations and incentivizing individuals?
It's interesting questions. It's funny because when Johann, you said it initially, I thought you said selfish and irrational. I realized you said selfish and rational is what the professor had told you, but I would have gone with selfish and irrational. And Shawn's example bore that out very, very well. You'd be irrational, and hurt yourself in a selfish way. I think that all of us need to essentially evolve our mental structures to some degree. And some people maybe are naturally like this, and others need to get there, and others maybe never will. But it is good selfish behavior to be altruistic. It is good selfish behavior to be altruistic, because I cannot exist on my own. Guess what? I love this thing. I can't make one of these. I love the richness and diversity of the food that I can get in my hometown. I can't do that on my own. There's a reason why Henry Ford paid his workers a living wage. They could afford to buy the Model T. It was, hey, yeah, absolutely, I want the best workers doing the best work, but I also want the overall ecosystem to grow. They can afford to buy it. That means that I have a market that builds and builds and builds and builds. If we think about it the right way, even with COVID the right way, who likes wearing a mask? I hate it, absolutely. But you know what? It's good selfish practice to be altruistic and say, you know what? If we all do that, we can basically mostly open up. Maybe we can have bars in our restaurants the way we always had them, but we can mostly do the things we need to do and keep our economy going if I make that sacrifice. And guess what? I can work at home, but not everybody can work at home. So it's a good sacrifice for me to make so that everybody can be a little bit better. And when everybody's a little bit better, guess what? We have a happier, healthier society. There's less violence, there's less theft, there's less crime, all these good things. It's hard for humans to tie long-term results to short-term behavior. If we can do that better, if we may teach that better, if we can reinforce that better or whatever, then we think we can start to make some of those changes.
Yeah, and I think too that if then you mentioned that it's we can have selfish motives to be altruistic, but I wonder if we can not even turn it around and go further, and we can be like, let's be altruistic because we are other-centered. And then when you think of that in business, like you want to put something out there, whether a product or a service, is because you want to like feel a need, right? You want to help someone with the problem then they have. And I guess it's part of what design thinking is about, it trying to figure out what that problem is and try to solve it. So I think this in this conversation to try to keep these in mind when people start businesses would be, it seems to be very helpful, and to make business even more attractive for a lot of people, and even this notion of making profit. That is something that is not bad, it's something that is good, and we can do it for the benefit of other people. So this is we are arriving to the end of the session, and I was just wondering maybe we could have a final thought on what we've been talking about. We went through, if I recap a little bit, we went from a journey from a personal journey in ethics to also realizing that now ethics is, we have to speak about ethics, and we try to do it in a way that it's not just ethics washing. So we have to rethink the way we do business. And then we could aim to influence the way we're going to build the tech industry of the Fraser Valley. So where does that leave us? Any final thoughts or final word of advice or word of wisdom for our listeners?
Go for it, John.
Very good. One thing that comes to mind is strong opinions loosely held, right? I think that we need to have opinions. We need to have strong opinions. We also need to not to identify our personal worth or our ego with our opinions. It is super apparent, especially now, with the election down south, with COVID and other things going on, that it's really, really critical for us to be able to argue to find truth rather than argue to find who's right. Prove that I'm right, so I'm going to argue. But prioritize finding truth over winning the discussion. And if we can get that behavior in more people, I think it would be a big step towards having a happier, healthier society.
Yeah, plus one to what John's saying there, maybe my closing comment to take it a bit of a different direction and add to that would be worth looking up sometime if you have a minute. Norwegian prison experiment. I think it's an HBR article. I'm not sure where it is, from a few years back. This idea that it's just as important to think about the outputs of our organizations as what it means to send the people in our organizations home to their families and friends. And we can dehumanize on both sides of that. We can be ethical in what we produce and unethical in how we produce those things, or we can try to think about the ripples going out from the organization in both directions. And I would just encourage us to think, if we think holistically about our impact, both on our teams and where they all go back to their homes and families, and are we helping them flourish, as well as to the actual outputs of our organizations, which is what we often fixate on. Is that just ethical or not? I think if we can keep both of those in mind, we create the type of environment that provides for long-term sort of sustainability and better sort of organizational realities that are friendly for us and friendly for our future.
Well, thank you, both of you, and I think we've resolved all questions around this. So
have we really solved everything?
There's that. We've
I hope this
resolved
was recorded then, because I don't remember what we all said.
Share this with the world.
Yes. So, and thank you, Shawn. Thank you, John, for your time and for all the prep. And I'd like to thank also Govinder and Tiffany and Raymond to have invited us for this panel. And I think Govinder was telling me it was the first time this panel happened in this conference, in this tech forum, and I think I will advocate for more. So let's do it again, and let's bring more people next year. So this is it for me, and we'll wait for Tiffany or Govinder to jump in.